Resuming debate, the honourable member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today we're talking about the deaths of 47,000 Canadians, many of them young people. 47,000 Canadians have died in the last number of years in drug-related deaths. Two of them, for example, that I'm going to be talking about today are young Brianna McDonald. She was 13 years old when she overdosed. She was found in a homeless encampment after having a cardiac arrest. 13, still a child. Still a child. Her parents tried to get her into treatment for months. 4 months. They could give her free crack pipes from the government, but they couldn't get treatment for her. Shame. And then we had Camilla Sword, 14 years old, died of a drug overdose. Again, hooked on drugs from the government's so-called safe supply, which I'll talk about shortly. But it's 47,000 people, many of them young people, many of them young children. And it's all of their parents and their siblings and their friends. And beyond that, it's all the people in drug psychosis who have committed violent acts and the innocent people they have hurt, violent break-and-enter, sexual assault, murders. All of the crime and mayhem to our small businesses, the decay in our cities and in our once safe communities. What we have seen in a very short amount of time in our cities, in our towns, in rural Canada, from coast to coast to coast, we have seen this drug crisis just wreak havoc on our communities. Innocent young people have died. And so we're in this place. I've been in this place now for 5 years, and what have we heard as really the solution, the proposal to this radical liberalization of drugs in this country? Well, from the NDP and the Liberals they support, their solution to all these drug deaths is more drugs. Government, taxpayer-funded drugs at a mass scale. No accountability. And what we have seen, Madam Speaker, what's really tragic is this taxpayer-funded so-called safe supply, and really nothing safe about it. Totally predictably, it is being diverted to vulnerable people, to young people. So a drug addict, someone addicted to drugs, will go and get their so-called safe supply from the taxpayer. They'll be provided many, many pills. And what's been happening is drug dealers will wait. They'll wait outside the pharmacy. And the person addicted to drugs will come out with their so-called safe supply and sell it to the drug dealer for either harsher drugs like heroin, fentanyl, or for cash. So they can buy some food or some cigarettes or alcohol or whatever it might be, another substance. So they're taking the government safe supply and they're exchanging it with a drug dealer for something harsher. And then the drug dealer is taking this so-called safe supply and taking that to kids, for example, and saying, oh, it's safe, it's government regulated. It'll be a nice high for you. The government and taxpayer is funding really the new gateway drug for kids that killed Camilla Sword and Brianna McDonald and thousands of more young people in this country. And in fact, the National Post and others actually have done phenomenal investigative journalism on this. And when they visited Camilla Sword's community, they talked to many of her friends, and I'll call one of her friends Hannah, not her real name. She said that kids aged 11 to 17, they should be watching cartoons and having snacks after school. But kids aged 11 to 17 in this young lady's circles were using taxpayer-funded drugs they bought off drug dealers. 11 years old. And of course, these drug dealers they glamorize it. Oh, it'll be great, it'll be fun. They downplay the risks. And then, Hannah said, once they get you hooked on this safe supply, then they push heroin on you. 11-year-olds, 13-year-olds, that's how we're getting Miss McDonald ending up dead, having a heart attack. Start on something safe, so-called safe, and then dead on fentanyl. Actually, one of Camilla's friend's mother said, quote, I've never met so many teenagers who are drug addicts before. A huge majority of teens are using because it's so easily available. She's talking about government safe supply, Madam Speaker. She said that her daughter, she had to pull her daughter out of that community because it was just so readily available, so tempting. In order to save her daughter's life, she had to pull her out of the community. That's a brave mom and a strong mom. But not all parents, not all parents are able to do that. Not all parents have that ability. And we're also seeing the vulnerability on First Nations. Another young woman was interviewed, a First Nations woman, her name was Jennifer, and she was talking about how drug dealers, same thing, taking these safe supply drugs, massive amounts of them, selling them for dirt cheap on First Nations reserves to vulnerable kids, who, as if they didn't have enough issues to deal with, now it's a flood of taxpayer-funded government safe supply. It's wrong what's being done, Madam Speaker. And it's so wrong, in fact, doctors are starting to speak out. In fact, Dr. Michael Lester, a Toronto-based addictions physician, again, this is his physician specialty, Madam Speaker, he said, "I had several patients who were drug-free for a long time and just couldn't resist the temptation of this very cheap hydromorphone," that's the safe supply, "that was now on the street. Every addiction medicine doctor I've spoken to has told me that on a daily basis in their offices they're dealing with diverted hydromorphone, either from new clients coming in who are addicted to it or patients of theirs that are using it as a drug of abuse." It's just so readily available. It's so tempting to people struggling, trying to move on from their addiction, that doctors are saying this is completely unacceptable, what they're seeing. And it's getting so bad that the BC government actually had to reverse course. Of course, they asked the Liberals, who would gladly help them, to decriminalize things like small possession. Again, we know it wasn't small possession. The possession amount could have killed hundreds of people of things like fentanyl. But they decriminalized toxic drugs like heroin, fentanyl, and meth for just over a year before the public outrage and the disorder that it caused forced them to move back and ask the Liberals to help them on that. In that same psychotic government policy year, the top doctor in BC, Dr. Bonnie Henry, ordered, this is really wild, it's just in line with all of this, ordered vending machines at ERs in hospitals, not for Pepsi or Coke or granola bar, no, free crack pipes. You're walking into an ER with a horrible injury, and you pass forward a free crack pipe. You can just get one on your way out like a goodie bag, Madam Speaker. So obviously the public outrage on both of these things was fierce, and rightfully so, and both of these things now have been pulled back, thankfully. But it just shows how far they're ready to go. That's the reality of where these policies are going, Madam Speaker. And so the people responsible for all of these deaths, over 47,000 deaths, right? The drug dealers, the drug traffickers and the drug importers and exporters that are bringing in the ingredients, importing the drugs, the ones that are producing the drugs, the meth labs, and then of course pushing them on people, right? So drug importers, drug producers, drug dealers, they have a lot of blood on their hands, right? So we should be taking strong measures to ensure that they're punished, and a message is sent to all the other ones that if you do this, you're going to be punished and go to jail for a long time, right? This is what we should be doing, or you would think that this would be the case already. Well, it was the case, Madam Speaker. There was mandatory prison time for drug trafficking, for drug importing, for drug production. There was. And then the Liberals came along, despite all of these deaths, and brought forward Bill C-5. You want to know what Bill C-5 did? It eliminated mandatory prison time for drug traffickers, drug producers, drug importers, all of the people responsible for killing over 47,000 people and causing unbelievable mayhem and destruction in our communities, no longer have mandatory prison time. With the specific goal, and they repeated this over and over again with Bill C-5, the specific goal was that less people would go to prison. So these people who are murderers, who are the reason that Camilla Sword, 14 years old, is dead, that Breonna McDonald is dead, are murderers. Under a Conservative government, Madam Speaker, there will be justice for these young women. There will be justice for the 47,000 people who have been killed by these drug traffickers and importers and these producers. They will be held accountable. They will be held accountable for that. And the porous border we've seen over the last number of years by this government will also be shored up. Did you know that after 9 years of the Liberal government, we've only had, I think, less than 1% of of the containers we bring in, and all of our shipments, all of our Amazon orders, all of our produce, all those things, less than 1% are checked, and that's where guns and drugs and precursors to drugs are coming in. Less than 1%, Madam Speaker. So our approach will be to take the border seriously, invest in scanning technology, and hold the monsters responsible for killing these 47,000 people and causing destruction and mayhem in our communities responsible for that. They will have to pay for what they've done. They will go to jail, and hopefully for a very long time under a Conservative majority government. Rest assured, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House
Madam
Leader.
Speaker, you just cannot believe what it is that Conservatives say. Let me give a specific example. The Leader of the Conservative Party. Here's the actual fact. In the 2011 and 12 budget, there was actually 14,833 full-time border officers, Madam Speaker. Fact, in 2015 and 16, there was 13,744. That is a decrease, not what the Leader of the Conservative Party tries to tell people, Madam Speaker. That's a decrease, and the Leader of the Conservative Party sat around the table when those 1,059 jobs were lost from Canada Border Control. Can the member tell Canadians why we should believe anything that the Conservative Party has to say when they can't even get basic facts as a part of their speeches, Madam Speaker?
The Honourable Member for Kildonan and St. Paul.
Madam Speaker, after 10 years of the Stephen Harper Conservative majority, there were almost 1,700 more CBSA workers than when he started, and an additional $500 million of investment. That's the Harper record, Madam Speaker. And at the same time, we balanced the budget and decreased crime by 20%. Right. Contrast that with the Liberal record increase of violent crime 50%, and the largest debt of all prime ministers before them combined. I'll take our record any day, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires à l'honorable député. I'm sorry. Désolé. Oops. Avignon-Lamitis. Avignon.
The Honourable Member for Avignon-Lamitis Matane-Matapédia. Thank you, Madam Speaker. What I agree with in this motion is about the fact that the Liberal government is not doing enough at the border. As my colleague and I have heard at the National Security Committee, sometimes there are only 6 RCMP officers covering the entire border. And what we heard from Customs and Immigration was that they could be helping, but currently there's a decree that prevents them from patrolling between border checkpoints, but currently they can't go and patrol between. That's why there's a problem in terms of staffing. Does my colleague agree that the minister could simply get rid of this rule, which is several years old, and enable these border services agents to help the RCMP to make the border safer?
Kildonan and St. Paul.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I certainly think it's worth looking into this suggestion from the member. I've enjoyed working with her on Public Safety Committee, and of course we had the Minister of Public Safety there, and we asked him a number of questions about the border and the fact that Canada is basically staring down the barrel of a 25% tariff on our biggest trading partner. We trade 80% with them, and they're threatening a 25% tariff if we don't shore up the border, which of course Conservatives have been calling on them to do for over 9 years now that they've been in power. But of course the minister, who was happy to jet set to Mar-a-Lago to make excuses for why the border security has been so bad in Canada, didn't have a plan. There was no commitment of numbers that they're going to put at the border. They had no commitment to expand the authority of the CBSA, beyond the ports of entry. There was no commitment to bring in RCMP officers or to work with provincial authorities. There was no commitment at all. In fact, it doesn't seem that they have a plan. And the Trump administration's coming in 5 weeks? Yep. No plan, and we're facing 25% tariffs. Doesn't sound like the government who's working for the people to me, Madam Speaker.
That's right. The Honourable Member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Look, fentanyl is the great killer of these days in Canada. It has affected every single community from coast to coast to coast. The fact that it is out there in street drugs means people are playing Russian roulette every time they go and buy from a dealer on the street. That is very true. When I was on the ground with the Standing Committee on Health in Vancouver for those 2 days, the very epicenter of where this crisis originated from, and I'm talking about people, street doctors, people who are doing policy on the street, not locked away in an ivory tower, they said that the Conservative policy approach on this is offside from where we need to be. So through you, Madam Speaker, treatment is important, but there are some people who are simply not ready for treatment and we don't have the spaces available. What do we do with those folks who are going to buy drugs right now? Do we simply allow them to play Russian roulette with their lives? Is that the Conservative approach to these people?
The Honourable Member for Kildonan and St. Paul.
Madam Speaker, I appreciate where the member is coming from, but the reality is, and I talked about a few of the young women who were killed as a result of the taxpayer-funded drugs that were gateways to this this horrific end for them. And I think what the NDP fails to recognize over and over again is the community impact, not just on the individual drug addict. It's the community impact of these drug dens, of the needle distribution in children's playgrounds, of children being accosted and assaulted by people at these so-called drug dens, or what we call drug dens, they call safe consumption sites. It is the broader public impact of these harmful policies that has led to all the disarray that we're seeing. We need to be realistic about this and bring these ridiculous policies to an end, Madam Speaker.